les agradecemos mucho estar aquí. Estamos muy emocionadas, muy emocionados por estar en este foro sobre ecología integral, sustentabilidad y bien común en América Latina. Esto en el marco de la Semana del Bien Común. Este es un día pues muy especial para nosotras y nosotros porque lo hemos organizado con mucho amor. Y bueno, pues le voy a dar las palabras para inaugurar el evento al doctor Peter Rosick, sacerdote jesuita, quien es director de la Red de Investigación en Ecología Integral en el Instituto de Investigación Laudato Si, en la Universidad de Oxford. Esta red es una comunidad global en crecimiento de académicos profesionales dedicados al paradigma de la ecología integral, impulsando la investigación transdisciplinaria para abordar los desafíos socioecológicos. Inspirada en la encíclica Laudato Si del Papa Francisco, la red fomenta asociaciones entre el mundo académico, organizaciones basadas en la fe, poseedores de conocimientos indígenas y comunidades para enfrentar los apremiantes desafíos climáticos y de biodiversidad, así como para promover la justicia ambiental, la sostenibilidad y las iniciativas colaborativas en apoyo de la ecología integral. Muchas gracias, doctor Rosick, por estar aquí con nosotros. Le voy a dar también la palabra al doctor Alberto Irezábal, egresado de la Universidad Iberoamericana Ciudad de México en la carrera de Ingeniería Industrial, doctor en Gestión Avanzada de Organizaciones y Economía Social por la Universidad Mondragón de España. Ha recibido reconocimientos como el primer lugar en el Premio de la Innovación con Vinculación Social del Banco Santander y la CEP en 2009 o el Premio al Compromiso Social de la Universidad Iberoamericana en 2011. Por más de 12 años ha acompañado a comunidades indígenas celtales en Chiapas en las cadenas de valor de café, miel, cosméticos y del sector de las finanzas solidarias. Actualmente es el director del Centro Internacional de Investigación de Economía Social y Solidaria. Y también voy a presentar al doctor José Alberto Lara, doctor y maestro en Economía por el Colegio de México y licenciado en Administración por la Universidad La Salle. Actualmente es director del Centro Transdisciplinar Universitario para la Sustentabilidad, el CENTRUS, aquí de la Universidad Iberoamericana. Ha sido profesor investigador de tiempo completo en el Instituto de Investigaciones de Desarrollo con Equidad, del EQUIDE, y del Departamento de Estudios Empresariales de la misma universidad, así como del CENTRUS, de la Licenciatura en Sustentabilidad Ambiental. Es miembro del Sistema Nacional de Investigadores, nivel 2, y ha sido consultor en diversos temas de política en materia social y ambiental para diversas instituciones de cooperación y gubernamentales. Tanto el doctor Peter Rosick como el doctor Irezábal como el doctor Lara pues han sido fundamentales para que se lleve a cabo este evento, así que pues les dejo la palabra para la inauguración.
Gracias, María. Pues muchas gracias, María. Muy buenos días a todas y a todos quienes nos acompañan en este auditorio aquí en la Universidad Iberoamericana. Also a very warm welcome to the people that are connecting from abroad. I hope that you will enjoy this session, especially this forum. Estamos muy contentos de que continuamos con este segundo día de la Semana del Bien Común y específicamente hoy con una temática que nos interpela. Ayer ya hablábamos de cómo esta crisis civilizatoria pues nos afecta no solamente a las personas en los márgenes, quienes por supuesto son quienes más la sufren, pero también en el norte global y en espacios que parecieran ser privilegiados. También ayer pudimos conocer algunos caminos y rutas para salir de esta crisis civilizatoria, así como voces poderosas que nos ayudaban a ampliar nuestra mirada y abrir nuestro corazón. Hoy continuamos con este foro de ecología integral y ahora les voy a dar la oportunidad al doctor José Alberto Lara y al doctor Peter Rosick para que nos hablen un poquito más, primero a José Alberto y luego a Peter, de esto que es la ecología integral y cómo se interconecta con el bien común, cómo se interconecta con aquellas luchas, con aquellos procesos que, como ayer también se comentaba, llenan de esperanza un mundo que a veces parece estar en una situación de desesperanza. Este foro de ecología integral es el inicio del que espero sea una larga colaboración entre universidades que compartimos temáticas y sueños como pues la Universidad de Oxford, la Universidad Iberoamericana de la Ciudad de México y también otras universidades que se suman y que están aquí presentes y que muchas y muchos de ustedes van a poder ir escuchando a través de las diferentes mesas que vamos a tener durante el día y de las cuales les hablaremos al cierre de esta sesión. Entonces yo con eso les quiero dar la bienvenida Antes de darle la palabra a José Alberto, y qué bueno que me acuerdo, quisiera presentar que nos acompaña a la distancia, y no sé si hay posibilidad de que podamos ponerla en el fondo. Quisiera presentar a quien nos va a dar la lectura, digamos, inaugural de este foro, que es la doctora Celia Dion-Drummond, la directora del Laudato Si Research Institute de la Universidad de Oxford, y me va a permitir leer su biografía en inglés, pues también un poco para ir conectando en el idioma en el que estamos. Professor Celia Dion-Drummond is the director of the Laudato Si Research Institute and senior research fellow at Campion Hall at the University of Oxford. She also is visiting professor in theology and science at the Center for Catholic Studies at Durham University and was professor of theology at the University of Notre Dame from 2011 to 2019. Celia began her career in the natural sciences, graduating with a bachelor and master in botany from the University of Cambridge, as well as a receiving PhD in plant physiology from the University of Reading in 1980. The global and ethical challenges of the use of GMOs encouraged her to retrain in theology, education, and environmental ethics. After a year of Christian studies at Regent College in Vancouver, Celia gained another bachelor in theology from Trinity College and a PGCE in religious studies and science from the Manchester Metropolitan University before completing her second PhD in systematic theology at the University of Manchester. Her main research interests are in the theological and ethical engagement with the natural and social sciences on questions related to ecology, genetics, animal studies, and anthropology, drawing on a wide variety of sources ranging from Catholic thinkers such as Sergius Bulgakov and Hans Urs von Balthasar to contemporary evolutionary science and psychology. Celia addresses multiple topics raised from disciplines as diverse as systematic theology, global development, and transhumanism. Present research projects include the evolution of gratitude as well as morality and pneumatology. Celia has published hundreds of academic articles and book chapters and edited or published as single author over 20 scholarly books. Her most recent publication is In Solidarity with the Earth, a multidisciplinary theological engagement with gender, mining, and toxic contamination, edited with Hilda P. Koster. Celia, thank you very much for joining us here. I'm going to give the word to José Alberto to give a brief introduction, and then to Peter also to give us a brief introduction, and I hope that this will be a very engaging panel. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Beto. Buenos días. Pues a mí me da mucho gusto estar acá. Me gusta también ver este auditorio lleno, porque no es fácil llenar este auditorio en particular. Yo estoy realmente entusiasmado de que, pues bueno, mi tocayo Alberto, pero Peter, Celia y todas las personas de Laudato Si Research Institute nos hayan dado este apoyo, este entusiasmo para organizar este evento. Ya veremos con Celia, con Peter, a qué nos referimos con ecología integral, pero es un término que es muy afín a lo que estamos haciendo nosotros en el Centrus. No sé si la mayoría de ustedes sepa qué es, pero es un centro de sustentabilidad en la Ibero, el cual actualmente estoy dirigiendo. Este evento realmente llevó mucho tiempo de organización. Sí quisiera agradecer específicamente a María, que está ahí en los controles, porque le dedicó mucho tiempo, mucho esfuerzo, mucho estrés en que todo esto sucediera. Ustedes la vieron a lo mejor conectando ahí los últimos cables. Entonces realmente mucho del trabajo es de ella, pero igualmente el apoyo que recibimos de Peter, de todo el Laudato Si Research Institute fue muy importante. Entonces yo no voy a tomar más tiempo, o sea, me da gusto estar aquí. Les agradezco su presencia a todo el mundo, tanto los que están de este lado como los que están allá, y bueno, estoy entusiasmado de oír lo que nos van a decir. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, José Alberto. Antes de darle la palabra a Peter, un recordatorio. La conferencia se dará en inglés, así que si alguien necesita, aquí en la entrada tenemos estos aparatitos, tenemos traducción simultánea al español, entonces para quien lo necesite lo pueden tomar, están justo aquí afuera. Y con eso, Peter, te doy la palabra.
Thank you very much, Alberto, as well as Jose Alberto and all of you for this wonderful setting for the event in which we celebrate integral ecology. Greetings to everyone present here. Buen dia, buenas tardes for those that are in Oxford, Europe, and elsewhere. Since I have moved recently to England in November last year, I've also learned a little bit of the British culture, which is we often apologize. And I have to apologize, I don't speak Spanish. No hablo bien español, pero lo entiendo. So be careful. It's a wonderful language, but there are so many languages, and we will speak about that later. There is a strong connection between languages and biodiversity protection, between the indigenous and other communities and languages. So more about that later. It's really a pleasure to introduce today the work of the Laudato Si Research Institute based at Campion Hall in Oxford, LSRI as we abbreviate it, and the emerging global network called Integral Ecology Research Network that I am supposed to lead, and both of which are engaged in this innovative work at the intersection of ecology, theology, natural sciences, social sciences, as well as social and environmental justice and beyond, and especially this year as we celebrate in our team and beyond, now globally, so-called Festival of Integral Ecology. The network, which is part of the Laudato Si Research Institute, is a growing global network of researchers, practitioners, communities, all dedicated to advancing the paradigm of integral ecology. This paradigm, inspired by Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical and other documents, calls for a deeply integrated approach that addresses ecological and social issues through scientific, ethical, and spiritual lenses. And those of you that are interested in joining the network as it grows and as it is established over the next few years, most welcome. And it's really a privilege to work here with Alberto and Jose Alberto and the university here at Ibero-Americana. It wouldn't have started without your warm welcome a year ago when I was here. It's truly a pleasure to be here and collaborate. So thank you very much. A little bit about our mission, LSRI and IERN. We lead transdisciplinary research and collaborative efforts to confront the pressing socio-ecological challenges of our time. A key focus of our work is fostering partnerships and collaborations among academia, faith-based institutions, indigenous knowledge holders, and marginalized communities. Through these collaborations, we aim to draw wisdom from people and the planet and to catalyze global socio-ecological transformation for a reconciled world. I know this has been a lot of very big terms. And Celia will say more about transition and the transformation and something that we call socio-ecological conversion. And let me say a few words about this conversion in this introduction. We are all invited to go through a process of conversion. The Pope and others, and especially the poor, call us to convert to a life that is sustainable. However, this conversion comes with a price. We know that we have to change our lives, don't we? And we know that our communities need to change. And we know that systemic, huge state and other structures need to change. So it comes with a price. And not only it comes with a price that we have to give up a little bit, there are some of us that give all they have, their lives, to defend the environment, to defend the territories, and to defend especially the poor in those territories. You would maybe know that in the last 10 years, at least 2,000 people were killed and many more victims just those that defend environments. Unfortunately, 90% of those are here in Latin America. I was just in Colombia at COP16, where we wonderfully collaborated, but 3 out of 10 people killed are in Colombia. Here in Mexico, just a few weeks ago in Chiapas, where I had the pleasure to visit the mission in Bachajon and the great cooperative work there, an indigenous priest was killed 3 weeks ago. It comes with a price. Conversion comes with a price, and it's not easy. However, we continue that work, and we want to pursue it. So while the Laudato Si Research Institute and the growing network, the LSRI provides the academic foundations. Academia is very important. Thinking is important. And it's really an excellent place to collaborate with, to work at. And I think it's a global institution when it comes to the questions of theology and other venues as we explore integral ecology. The network that we are building translates this into practical applications, partnerships, impactful initiatives. So together our work bridges academic inquiry with community-driven action, supporting environmental justice, biodiversity, sustainability, and so on. And our collaborative event today within the framework of Integral Ecology Festival, in collaboration with Iberoamericana, Mexico City, and many others, exemplifies this commitment. With this, I think I can give the floor to Celia Den Drummond, who is joining us online, and welcome her to this place as well as online. Celia, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction. Apologies, I forgot to press the audio button. I'm now the title of my talk today is Theological Foundations of Integral Ecology. So what I want to do is get to the heart of the theological aspects of integral ecology as Pope Francis understood it, and also try and show how this is actually transformative of not just our practices, but also the universities and education as a whole. So we're trying to model something slightly different in terms of the way we do our academic work. And I have a PowerPoint slide show as well, which I'm just going to share, which I hope will work. So hopefully you can see that now. So first of all, it's a real privilege and honor to be with you. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but we have a wonderful emissary from our institute, Peter, with you, who's just introduced himself and the work of both LSRI and IERN. And as he said, the context of integral ecology is becoming really painful as we think about what's happening in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, other parts of Latin America. Those stories of violence against those trying to protect their land rights are really moving. And how can we as academics support those who are giving their lives and their livelihoods to defend the rights that they have of the earth and help towards its healing, as we heard about the Ancestral Healers Network yesterday from a wonderful conversation with Lorena Cabnal. What I'm going to do now is show you a slide from a project that's been led by my colleague at LSRI, Dr. Severine Danielian, who has been instrumental really in initiating this work with marginalized communities and others, and this faith-based participation in natural resource governance. And extractive industrial and development projects challenge faith communities who maintain this profound care for the natural world and human well-being. And so they're establishing, I think, through their practices, a holistic narrative of locally led sustainable development. Protection of the people and the land is an integrated and interconnected whole. So what I'm trying to say is that these connections aren't just theoretical, they also offer motivation and hope at moments when these territories are being under threat. And I think that the experience of these activists and others witness to an alternative way of perceiving reality that Pope Francis articulates on Care for Our Common Home, Laudato Si, and that alternative is integral ecology. And so for this lecture today, I'm going to discuss different aspects of what integral ecology is to start with, and then I'm going to look at what those theological foundations might be and why it's so important to the faith communities. And what is the technological paradigm that is opposing integral ecology, that in a sense has gripped particularly Western cultures, and we've been caught up, and what I'll show is that we've been caught up in it without even being aware of it. And then I'll look at the relationship between integral ecology and natural law, which is behind some of the language of integral ecology, but not necessarily in the way you might expect. A new theological anthropology that emerges, integral ecology and the common good, which is the topic of this amazing forum that we're having with you, together with you this week. And then I will argue that it's more than simply an ethic of development. And then finally I'm going to come to some maybe critical comments on some of the limitations of integral ecology, because I think we need to look at that as well, and we're going to start developing beyond that. So first of all then, the different meanings of integral ecology. And, there have been a number of different articles and research done on this, and very often what you'll find is that scholars will tie integral ecology to their own particular preferences. So sometimes it's been understood as how to understand climate change, how to think about international relations or planetary boundaries, even a preferential option for the poorest in the world, which includes ecology, perhaps a case for ecological economics, and maybe even integral liberation, as Gustavo Gutierrez talked about, and he passed away very recently. So in a sense, we could say this lecture is dedicated to his memory. And then practicing spirituality through the examen, that's the Ignatian practice. And then finally, another article I saw argued that integral ecology is just grounded in a theology of mercy. So none of those different perspectives are necessarily wrong, but what I think is that they are aspects of what integral ecology means, but they lack the breadth and of vision and the depth of theological understanding that I think we really need to grasp if we're going to understand what Pope Francis meant and what he intended by using that term. And so I'm leaving to one side discussions of secular discussions of integral ecology, because that's another lecture altogether, but just to say that there are scientists and others that have been using the term in rather different ways. So given the looseness of integral ecology, even in terms of how you understand it in the encyclical itself, it's not really surprising that it's taken on a meaning of its own. And I think that kind of ambiguity is very similar to the term sustainability that's been taken up and used in all sorts of different ways. And so what I hope to do in this lecture is to say what are the reasonable alternative ways of understanding what Pope Francis meant, or intended at least, with integral ecology. And crucially for Pope Francis, I believe, is what are the theological foundations. And without theological foundations, integral ecology sort of morphs into very general notions of multidisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. I mean, these are all very good in and of themselves, and I support work in transdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. But integral ecology is much more. It's much more than that, because it doesn't get to the heart of what makes people convert, if you see what I mean. Why would they want to convert just for multidisciplinarity? And maybe even some people have tied integral ecology into development sciences as well, or political philosophy. And again, it's collapsing it into something else. And even a term like the common good, which I'll come to later, if you reduce integral ecology to the common good, which is well and good in itself, it's not quite enough. So And I think in order to understand what integral ecology is, we have to think back to the classic tradition. Yes, it's grounded in the Western traditions, but I think there are riches in that Western tradition as well, and we need to know what they are and acknowledge that, even if we are also trying to engage with very different cultural contexts and indigenous spiritualities and so on. And so in the classic tradition, if you want to know what a virtue is, you have to know its vice. So if we want to know what good is, we have to know what evil is. And so similarly, if you want to know what integral ecology is, it only makes sense by reference to its mirror image. And of course, there are distinctions. Virtues traditionally have been thought of as individualistic, whereas integral ecology cuts across all different levels. It cuts across individuals, communities, societies more broadly. And of course, it's that broadest cultural scope that Pope Francis really wants to transform. But the overall shape of the encyclical, if we think about where that the darker side, as it were, starts or is shaped, it begins with a theology of creation. Then he discusses what has gone wrong. And then he talks about a vision of redemption. And the integral ecology sort of falls into that redemptive phase. So how to treat the earth and one another aright. The technocratic paradigm, which is associated, if you like, with the negative, the darker side, the opposite of integral ecology, provides, rather like the ancients did with vices, a much greater clarity of what integral ecology means. And I will argue too that integral ecology isn't just an idea, but it's an overarching paradigm within which all ethical thinking on care for our common home sits. And he based developed his discussion of integral ecology in the 4th chapter. So we had a number of different chapters before that, arguing first of all about the scientific basis for what is happening to our earth, then the theological and biblical roots of reason to care for creation, and his underlying understanding of what cultural issues were to stake, and then integral ecology then arising or coming out of his critique of the technocratic way of thinking about the world. And such technocratic thinking, forms a distorted cultural paradigm arising out of epistemological frameworks which are largely accepted in the West. So they become woven in. So he's not, I should add, opposed to science and technology. He's opposed to their substitution for moral and theological ways of framing all our human relationships and priorities. It's that filtering in to all our human relationships and priorities that he wants to challenge. And again, once a distorted form of anthropocentrism takes hold, life becomes, to quote Pope Francis, one-dimensional. And in this situation, an individual will seek to control and manipulate the world rather than being in tune with it. So what then is the technocratic paradigm? First of all, instead of being in tune with the natural world, relationships are confrontational. And where the methods of science and technologies have become an epistemological paradigm that shape our lives. Products of our technology, though, are not morally neutral for Pope Francis. And he says this, for they create a framework which ends up conditioning lifestyles and shaping social possibilities along the lines dictated by the interests of certain powerful groups. Decisions which may seem purely instrumental are in reality decisions about the kind of society we want to build. And then technology that takes a grip on the human imagination, Pope Francis also finds offensive because he says it tends to absorb everything into its ironclad logic. The point here is that technocratic paradigms have become so woven into our societies we don't even notice its presence anymore. It's a kind of power, of deceptive power, if you like, infiltrating the culture in which we live, shaping those decisions without even being aware of what's happening. And it's suppressing alternative forms of creativity and freedom as well. And Western societies then are caught up in these unhealthy patterns of thinking and acting in social, economic and political spheres. Cultural presuppositions then have to undergo a radical change. He's also highly critical of the market economy in that he doesn't think they will solve global problems of hunger and poverty, and unregulated market growth just encourages waste and excessive, or as Pope Benedict XVI said, super development. He's highly critical of the narrowness of the mindset that he believes such a technocratic paradigm generates, and as specialization and fragmentation take its grip, it becomes harder and harder to appreciate the whole. And all those facets of the technocratic paradigm contribute to anxiety, environmental degradation, loss of purpose and community living. And this is the context in which he says realities are more important than ideas. So the technocratic paradigm takes over everything in a kind of globalized logic, which prevents ecological initiatives bearing fruit. And so we need a clear and robust transition to an alternative way of thinking. We talk about the carbon transition, but what about the cultural transition to integral ecology? That's what we want, a new culture that generates a new kind of epistemology or way of knowing. And accompanying such epistemology, practical outcomes such as politics, educational programs, lifestyle changes, and renewed spiritualities. And all these need to coalesce to resist the kind of onslaught of the technocratic paradigm, which is holding its grip on global society, so not just the West, but all over the world. Well, are there any sort of signs of change? And he thinks, yes, there are. Maybe he's pessimistic in some ways about what's happening in contemporary societies, but he does recognize there are signs of some alternatives, such as when cooperatives become less polluting means of production, where technologies are at the service of humanity, truly helping them live with more dignity and less suffering, or where contemplation of beauty manages to overcome reductionism. But these changes are liminal, they're slight, they're like a mist seeping gently beneath the closed door, as he says in Laudato Si. And he also argues that there's a diminishing faith in the power of constant novelties feeding into technological process. So that lack of faith then leads to emptiness and a lack of depth in life. So if you like, there's a hole in people's hearts that's waiting to be filled with something else. And so societies are ready for something new in what Pope Francis believes should be a bold cultural revolution. And the novelty in his overall approach is he's not content just to identify individual or structural sins, which have been used by liberation or other scholars. He's probing at a deeper, unnoticed, and even pervasive cultural sin or sickness, which is why a cultural revolution is the answer. So one of the first things we need to do is to rethink some of our basic anthropological assumptions. Why is it that humanity has become so caught up in a mindset that prizes technological thought over reality? And he traces that to a distorted anthropocentrism that doesn't recognize its true place in the world. And this is also a theological point, so understanding the basic God-human-earth relationship. And this is just a slide to show that one of the first occasions, really, of using the term integral ecology came from an International Theological Commission publication in 2009, some years before Laudato Si, In Search of a Global Ethic, a New Look at Natural Law. Pope Francis resists using the term natural law, but the fact that it appears in this document implies at least that there is something about natural law that he is inspired by in thinking about what integral ecology means. And he avoids the term because natural law is sometimes being used in a way which oppresses marginalized communities. But when he talks about the natural and moral structure of humanity, He points to the basic value of the natural law or natural world which lies behind natural law theories. If natural law then was the background of his thinking when citing Centesimus Annus, he's also arguing for a way to situate humanity within a divinely ordained integral cosmic order. So going back to a Thomistic understanding of natural law rather than some of its more modern interpretations. And he also argues that the harms done to our natural world reflect our disregard for the message contained in the structures of nature itself. So refusing to acknowledge the worth of a poor person, a human embryo, a person with disabilities, is in itself connected with our ability to hear the cry of nature itself. For in his thinking, everything is interconnected. Again, hinting at a natural law framework. And he's aligning here with traditional Catholic ethics in arguing that the right to care for human persons, including the most vulnerable, is bound up with changes in attitudes towards the natural world as such. And he stresses that the domineering attitude of a distorted anthropology that arrogantly declares independence from reality resists that true human vocation. That vocation then is to be a cooperator with God in the work of creation. And a domineering attitude for him amounts to a denial of our humanity. So instead, he presses for a new understanding of theological anthropology that's grounded in our relationship with others and in the world around us. And so the turning around from one paradigm to the next depends on the profound work of healing of all human relationships. And such healthy relationships respects the nobility of others and is open to them, set alongside an openness to God in a deeply personal acknowledgement of thou. So it's within this theological understanding of humanity that Pope Francis's paradigmatic vision of integral ecology is worked out. And the first time he mentions integral ecology in Laudato Si, he also refers to Saint Francis of Assisi, who is, as he says, the example par excellence of the care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. And so while he also uses the language of integral human development, integral ecology is more explicitly conscious of its religious dimension, but it begins with a biblical understanding of creation. So he says this: we urgently need a humanism capable of bringing together the different fields of knowledge, including economics, in the service of a more integral and integrating vision. So it counters, too, all the aspects of the technocratic paradigm I summarized earlier, and there isn't time to go through every single item of that opposite of that counter, but all you need to think about is the opposite of the technocratic paradigm, and that's what integral ecology is. So it's in tune with the natural world rather than in opposition to it. It's the vision within it which any technological innovation needs to take place, and so on. So what about the common good? The common good aligns with integral ecology in Pope Francis' thinking, and he discusses it in the encyclical and notes its relevance and its importance, so he's not denying the importance of the common good. But it comes in relation particularly to the argument for human rights and solidarity with the most vulnerable human communities and an extension to future generations. And justice and sustainability are just as relevant then to future generations as the present, but he doesn't argue for broader notions of the common good to be extended to all creatures in a way that some scholars have suggested. So it's not an enlargement of the common good. Rather, he confines the common good to humanity, even though he brings into it issues of environmental justice, such as the right to clean water and so on. So it's set within its own framework rather than changing the meaning of the common good. An interpretation of the common good, therefore, in my interpretation, is that it's nested within integral ecology and part of its paradigm, rather than replacing it as an analogous term. And the distinction but relation between the common good and integral ecology is clear in his comment that inner peace is closely related to care for ecology and the common good, because lived out authentically, it is reflected in a balanced lifestyle together with a capacity for wonder, which takes us to a deeper understanding of life. Integral ecology creates a different kind of social imaginary from which the technocratic paradigm that captivated human societies. It's a different kind of vision that cuts across everything. So the common good is just part of that, but it's not the whole. And it also invites a different way of approaching economics as well. Instead of generating anxiety, integral ecology captivates the heart and mind in positive ways. So that an integral ecology includes taking time to recover a serene harmony with creation, reflecting on our lifestyles and our ideals, and in contemplating the Creator who lives among us and surrounds us. His presence must not be contrived, but found uncovered. That sense of uncovering the presence of God within the natural world around us. And this heartfelt approach to life with each other, other creatures and God, stirs up a different kind of practice, one that's bent on integrating ecological responsibility and action with care for the most vulnerable. So just to sum up, just briefly, integral ecology is dependent on Pope Francis's theological vision for a renewed anthropology. And this sits alongside proper valuation of the natural world as God's gift. It's also situated as a radical and mirror image of the technocratic paradigm that he argues has gripped the imagination and action of contemporary societies. And it's also more than simply an common ethic of development. And some have argued again that it's simply a development of integral human development and other terms which have been used since 1968 in Popularum Progressio, published by Pope Paul VI. And also in the post-war and decolonialization period, this integral model of development needed to include the development of each person and the whole person in all her dimensions, so not just economic development. And in this argument, integral ecology just adds in ecological dimensions to that integral human development model. But integral human development signals the social, cultural, economic, and political dimensions of human life and the dignity of each person. Whereas integral ecology in this argument signals more the biological, physical, environmental dimensions of human life and interaction between all living systems, human and non-human. The argument here is that integral human development needs integral ecology in order to address the deep ecological crisis. We know about this: loss of biodiversity, acidification of oceans, melting of ice caps and glaciers. So one needs another vision of human progress, another understanding of what counts as social, economic development, which is provided for by integral ecology. From my perspective, rather like the common good, is that this understanding of integral ecology is certainly true, it's all correct, but it's not sufficiently all-embracing. It's rather one, albeit a crucial dimension in the complexity of what the term signifies and intends. Pope Francis then is doing far more than building on previous encyclicals and ideas. He's asking for a radical cultural revolution across all societies, especially those that are most, inverted commas, developed, and that has a theological mission at its heart. So what about some of the limitations of integral ecology? I've been pressing for its theological interpretation and being at the heart of conversion. But what about aspects of it which are maybe somewhat limited? Maybe he fails to address sufficiently the suffering of the natural world as such, other creatures, the plurality of life in all its different dimensions. Eco-theologies have more recently until more recently, often tended towards a more romantic understanding of nature's harmony and integrity. But what about the suffering of the natural world, which is caught up with our own suffering as well? Ecologists understand more than most that the wounded nature of creatures living and dying on our earth. Just as social scientists and anthropologists are aware of human suffering, often triggered by structural injustices. We know about the mining projects, for example. And there's a strong listening component within the integral ecology paradigm, which implies a strong connectedness to a certain soil and culture and closeness to the lives of the marginalized. But how can these experiences and concepts from those of very different cultures and religions be integrated with a strong theological understanding between God, humanity, and the natural world that Pope Francis presupposes and supports in integral ecology, and I would argue is integral to his own understanding of what integral ecology means? He attempts such a synthesis in Queridas Amazonia by summarizing how he perceives the relationships between indigenous mysticism and the Catholic tradition. But what he doesn't address is the tension in such position. How can we marry up Mayan cosmology, for example, with our understanding of the Judeo-Christian faith and our understanding of God as creator and so on? His mantra that reality is more important than ideas means getting philosophical conundrums right or consistent is not necessarily a priority, but he still presents integral ecology as an alternative epistemology. So how does that make sense if he's not going to do the hard philosophical work that's necessary to clarify some of these ideas? So a priority then in engaging in ecological and relationally healing practices with those of different cultures. And it's through that practical process of exchange that he hopes a new cultural paradigm will become the norm. But that's going to be a very great challenge, I think. Not impossible, but it's a challenge, especially as integral ecology implies a normative approach which comes from a particular tradition. So how can that honour the plurality that we heard about yesterday? How can plurality mix without becoming individualistic? And that I think is part of the challenge. Finally, in terms of critique, what about the role of women who are essential in defending human rights and protecting land? And recognising and supporting their leadership is really crucial for safeguarding the rights of rural, low-income and Indigenous communities. Yet the role of women is barely discussed in Pope Francis's approach to integral ecology. There's a lack. So the other creatures are kind of missed out or not recognised sufficiently, and nor are women. And I will just come now with a few conclusions. So thank you so much for your patience in listening to me. And we're going to open it up for further discussion. So just to conclude, integral ecology is one of the most novel aspects of Pope Francis's approach to care for our common home, but its promiscuous interpretation has tended to render it less meaningful. The theological foundations of his interpretation of integral ecology should not be bypassed. I've argued in this lecture that integral ecology presents an alternative, theologically grounded paradigm to the technocratic one. But it would be simplistic to argue that Pope Francis rejects all technology. What he objects to is detaching the human person from its understanding as grounded ontologically in creation, which itself, he argues, follows laws that have been put in place by a divine creator. While he avoids explicit reference to natural law, its ethical premises are presupposed, even while integral ecology breaks loose from any narrow perception of its meaning. He insists that all things are entangled and interconnected, mirroring that interrelationship that arises from an understanding of God as Trinity. The common good is an important part of the meaning of integral ecology, but the common good retains its distinct focus on human rights, including the rights to clean water and ecological health. And there may be problems with the language of rights, as we heard yesterday. While there are tensions in his theological starting point with his broad sympathy for indigenous spiritualities, integral ecology at least opens up the possibility for exploration and conversation. Listening carefully to the voice of the earth and the voice of the poor is therefore the starting point for a holistic and yet grounded understanding of the meaning of integral ecology. And I'll finish with just a slide to our own Research Institute page. So I hope you'll feel inclined to look at some of that and some of the. So thank you so much.
Celia, thank you very much for that wonderful lecture. I think that you've showed us the complexities that lie within a concept such as integral ecology. And so I will also like now to give the word to Peter, so you can continue on this reflection.
Thank you, Alberto. And thank you, Celia, for this rich exploration of the theological foundations of integral ecology. I think these reflections help us to see integral ecology as a framework for reimagining our relationship with creation. And it has much to offer, and I would like to highlight some of the points. The first one being integral ecology as a holistic paradigm. Celia presented integral ecology as more than an ethic. It's a revolutionary framework. And that's where I get scared. Celia said, I quote, this soft-spoken, brilliant English woman we just heard, she said, listen, I quote, is a radical cultural revolution. Did you hear that? In her presentation. Celia now goes to Chiapas, imagine. She speaks to the two rebel groups that are in drug cartels. Will she be welcomed? She will put herself in some danger. Or let her speak to the former Mexican president, AMLO. Speaking about cultural revolution, he will say, no, we are the revolution. We are the permanent revolution, right? So who does speak about revolution? I think it's important to clarify. I think Celia speaks of a peaceful revolution. I think it's important to clarify. I grew up in a communist regime in a small country of Slovenia. They were speaking about the revolution all the time. And some of my family members were on the communist side, so they got pretty well off. But others were put in prison, like my grandfather, and my uncle was shot. Revolutions are not an easy process. They need to be peaceful. And I think integral ecology, if we consider it as a revolution, it represents, as Celia said, an alternative to technocratism, and redefines how we understand and how we act when it comes to addressing ecological and social issues. So it needs to be a holistic approach. It's not just about taking power. It's not just about saying who is right. There is something also very Ignatian there, which is about discernment and process, and doing this together in a holistic manner, and seeing beyond fragmented approaches. At the network that we are creating with LSRI, and among the Jesuit universities and many other partners, we are creating hubs of research and action that embody this kind of interdisciplinary, even if possible, transdisciplinary approach. And they focus on areas such as food systems and ethical resource governance and biodiversity preservation and so on. And so we would like to ensure that our research considers the full spectrum of ecological and human well-being. So, Celia, your framing of integral ecology underscores this transformative potential of a holistic approach grounded in theology, yet widely applicable. The second point I would like to raise is the engagement with the marginalized and indigenous voices. Your emphasis, Celia, on the critical need to amplify the voices of the marginalized and indigenous communities is profoundly resonant. These communities are not just stakeholders, but are custodians of essential ecological wisdom. We've experienced that to truly serve in the spirit of integral ecology, our role must often be one of listening, supporting, and empowering those communities. As you highlighted, recognizing their role as stewards can reshape our own understanding of ecological responsibility, and this mutual learning enriches the global discourse on integral ecology. I was very struck over the last few days in Chiapas to learn more about how they use cooperatives and build social tissue. And thank you, Alberto, this morning for the word, social capital. It would be impossible to imagine to be an individual fully atomized in Chiapas, somewhere in Chilon or in Bachajon. It's all about community. You can't do without. And in fact, the more you rely on community, the more long-term you will be successful. Short-term, of course, coyotes and others will have gains, and you may benefit from those gains. But long-term, the community is the answer. And there too, this holistic approach comes into play. Another question that I've been asked twice now over the last 2 months, being first in India and here, and I'm sorry if this is a bit of a sensitive issue. It's called the sacrifice of chicken. You may have heard of it. In some cultures, indigenous culture, the killing of chicken is related to a strong sense of spirituality, and often hymns are being chanted when a chicken is sacrificed. In fact, in some of these cultures, you know who the best butcher is? Is the local priest. And why is this important? Because many of these communities know that when you kill an animal, and Celia spoke about the suffering of the natural world, when you kill an animal, you destroy part of the social tissue as well. It's not just destroying human tissue, there is the natural tissue that we are a part of. When you kill an animal, you do a great harm to the environment. It's not like most of us now relying on chicken coming from market stores and those chickens being slaughtered on a massive scale. And I'm not judging, but what I'm trying to say is that often the indigenous communities have a strong sense of life. And so if you kill a chicken, there needs to be a certain ritual of expiation, a certain ritual of atonement, so that reconciliation can be guaranteed at least to some extent. So they came to me and said, Father, can we sacrifice chicken if we are Christian? And I heard the same in Chiapas. And I think a lot of theological work still needs to be done so that we learn from these communities that actually do integral ecology, that actually have a whole amount and reservoir of respect toward nature and live it, while we often ourselves as Christians promote monocultures and killing of animals and plants. Now again, this is a huge debate I will not be entering, but there is something about learning from indigenous communities when it comes to spirituality and so. Which leads me to the next point. Celia spoke about reframing our anthropological and ethical approaches. She spoke about the need of new anthropologies and ethics, approaches that consider that acknowledge our deep interconnectedness with the world around us. This call resonates strongly with young leaders and researchers that we want to work with. And it's wonderful to see in this hall so many young students. And now would like to invite all of you to continue your work in healing our relationship with the creation. It's often, in fact, from you that we learn how to move, how to act in a sustainable manner. So thank you, young leaders. And thank you also to all of you who do research. I was so impressed that just a few weeks ago in India, many of the researchers, if not most of them, were actually tribal researchers doing their work hard. And so it was wonderful to see this interconnectedness and working together with them, because it reframes, what we do is reframing ethics and human identity in relation to creation. And thank you for doing that. And thank you also for helping us old guys to learn from you, but also to interact with you and do things together. My fourth point is about eco-conversion. So there is a lot that needs to be done on various levels. For example, Celia mentioned carbon conversion. We need to convert in terms of our carbon emissions. I am one of the worst people most likely here in this auditorium. Just flying here, I most likely, emitted close to a ton of CO2. And if I would fully comply to Paris Agreement, I only have 2 tons per year. And most of it often comes from food anyways. Carbon. You know what are the main causes of deforestation in Amazonia? The main cause, by far, is cattle. Are cows. I'm not blaming the cows. Cows are actually good for the environment if integrated in a holistic manner, but not what we currently do as humans, most of us nowadays. 1 kilo of beef produces 6 kilos of CO2. So it's not just about deforestation. Deforestation is connected to climate justice. So the way we eat, our diets have impact. I'm not saying that everybody should be vegetarian, but at least we need to know, and there is data about our own footprint. And it's easy to do. You know how much the footprint of Mexico is, more or less? Per capita, I think it's about 4 tons per year. So twice as much as we have for Paris Agreement. America is about 14 tons. Saudi Arabia is about 20 tons. So a huge transition has to happen. But as Celia emphasized, it's not just about carbon transition. It's just not just about biodiversity transition. It's not just about these healthy technological transitions, but also it's about a cultural transition. We need to change as a culture and go through a transformation. And my last point is about the role of transdisciplinarity and faith-based collaborations. Celia called for solidarity across sectors and disciplines, and I find that particularly relevant. And our transdisciplinary work aims to bridge a gap between faith-based institutions and NGOs, academic networks, scientific communities, and so. Just to give you an example, when it comes to COP, this is a conference of parties, and the current one on climate is happening in Azerbaijan, in Baku. One in Cali, in Colombia, focused on biodiversity. These are huge meetings, mostly of governments, and they mostly happen in the so-called blue zone. There is also a green zone. Both of them are important, but policy mostly happens in the blue zone. In the blue zone, we were able now for the first time to organize a few panels on integral ecology. And the panelists came from the indigenous communities and their leaders, faith leaders. We had a bishop and a priest working closely with the marginalized communities. We had a Buddhist monk. We had researchers. We had business people. And this is to show that we can work together and through a transdisciplinary approach support what integral ecology really, I think, hammers on is this holistic approach within which spirituality is crucial. In closing, I would like to thank Celia and all to reaffirm the essential principles that integral ecology calls us to embrace. At LSRI and the Integral Ecology Research Network, we are inspired to continue fostering partnerships, such as the one with Iberoamericana here in Mexico City and beyond, amplifying marginalized voices, and cultivating leaders equipped to navigate the urgent environmental and social issues of our time. Thank you again for collaboration and all the best.
Thank you very much, Peter, Celia, and José Alberto. So we will now move on to a moment of questions and answers. Es el espacio ahora para hacer las preguntas y las respuestas. Por ahí veo que ya empiezan a levantarse las manos. Me voy moviendo con el micrófono y a lo mejor podemos ahora recuperar un par de preguntas y luego pues damos espacio para las respuestas. Por aquí hay una y no sé si alguna otra más en el público. La pregunta, si quieren, la pueden hacer en inglés o en español y aquí podemos ayudar con la moderación. Y si se quieren presentar también y pues empezamos.
Buenos días, nos da mucho gusto estar aquí y nos motiva mucho todo lo que han mencionado Celia, Peter y todos los que están presentes. Soy Angélica Arellano, soy presidenta de la Red de Conciencia Ambiental Queremos Vivir de Tula Hidalgo. Lo que han dicho nos motiva y queremos hacerles una invitación para que vayan a Tula. Está 2 horas y en Tula se puede aplicar todo lo que han mencionado, porque lo que hagan por Tula lo van a hacer por la Ciudad de México. Recibimos las aguas residuales de 22 millones de personas de la Ciudad de México, de la capital del país. Los especialistas nos han dicho que no es un problema de Hidalgo, sino un problema de la capital, un problema de la nación, porque es la capital del país la que nos inunda. Al rato va a exponer Camila, mi hermana y yo estudiamos aquí en la Ibero diseño hace más de 30 años y hoy estamos aquí como activistas porque apelamos al ideario de la Ibero, al humanismo, y a que todas estas herramientas que nos puedan brindar nos ayuden, porque en todos los lugares se está luchando por el acceso al agua. Nosotros, el agua, Tula es la otra cara del agua, la que nos inunda, la que nos enferma, la que nos está matando, y lo que queremos es vivir, por eso así se llama nuestra organización. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta o comentario? Por acá.
Hello, thank you for your conference. My name is Jesus Becerril from Mexican Institute for Christian Social Thought. And I would like to know, as you referred, that it is necessary a cultural transition or as eco-conversion, and which are the main challenges? Because I love that you appointed that integral ecology is an important epistemology, but reality is more important than ideas or proposals. So I would like to know if you have identified the main challenges to accomplish this cultural transition or eco-conversion. Thank you.
Let's collect one more question and then I can give you the floor, Celia and Peter.
Buenos días, gracias por su excelente ponencia a la doctora Celia y al resumen que nos hizo el doctor Peter, bueno, el sacerdote Peter. Yo soy Isabel Cornejo, presidenta de Mujeres del Bosque de Cobos y animadora de animadores de la región centro del movimiento Laudato Si, aquí en México. Y bueno, mi pregunta es cómo involucrar a los jóvenes a que se integren a esta ecología integral y a tener una conversión ecológica.
Muchas gracias. Shall I translate that last question? No. Celia, I don't know if you were able to listen to that question in English with a translation. If not, I can help you now. So the question of Lisbeth was in terms of how can we help engage young people in terms of what was stated of this radical cultural revolution and how do we integrate them? What would be the first steps? And then I can give you the floor now, Celia, to answer the questions, and then Peter.
Okay, thank you very much, and both very good questions. I think the first one's about the challenge of cultural transition when it's a cultural revolution, if you like, when it is an epistemological process, but it's also reality is more important than ideas. What it points to is that both theory and practice need to hold hands. In other words, go side by side. So it's not enough just to talk about it. We also need to do something. And I think it also connects with a question about engaging young people. So in order to engage young people in integral ecology, we need to get young people out there doing practical works, but also reflecting on those works as well. So different ways of farming, for example. We have an agro project as well that Peter can talk about more fully, And I think it's when young people get engaged in practices that things start to sink in and make sense. And I also think that there is a bit of a dilemma when Pope Francis talks about reality being more important than ideas, because in one sense he's not necessarily consistent in that, because for him the big idea is integral ecology, but it's also very practical, and so it connects with reality. So what he should have said is reality is just as important as ideas, not more important. So I think the two go together, and it's also extremely important, I think, from my perspective, to transform the way we educate. So the way the university system is set up, what is given priority, are the ways of encouraging greater reflection on practice, for example, a greater integration with policy making. We're trying to model that a little bit in our institute, but it is very difficult. It's a challenge, and it is, as Peter very helpfully pointed out, it's a peaceful revolution. It's not a violent revolution. It's a way we're trying to seep in to change the culture. And you could say, well, this isn't quick enough. We need something radical and something quick. But at the same time, I think when we talk about the virtues and what the virtues are, they are inculcated through practices. And one of the things I've written about recently is the different ecological virtues and how they can be worked for through religious communities. If you like, we ask for those gifts to be given, particular gifts of ecological virtues. So there are ways to do this, I think, which are peaceful. It can join up with other initiatives which are practical as well. But just to do nothing is obviously not sufficient. And if we do nothing, we allow young people to sink into that ecological anxiety that's going to become more prevalent as time goes on, and as the likelihood of transition becomes less within our reach. I think it's still there, it's still possible. We can still encourage hope, for example, as a virtue. We can encourage faith, we can encourage love as well. So those three theological virtues, faith, hope and love, I think are also very important, so we can weave in traditional thinking about religion into these kinds of practices. We don't have to abandon some of those things, but we can also learn from indigenous communities as well about how to live well with other creatures and respect them in a way that acknowledges, what we're doing to the natural world, as Peter pointed out. Thank you.
Maybe start with the youth question. I think with young people, we need to spend time. I was in Bachahon. I had a Saturday off, working away in my room, and young people are singing in the church. Then after 1 hour, they're still singing. And after 2 hours, they're still singing. What are they doing? They're celebrating. They're spending time together. They dance. Young people have a lot of energy. And then, of course, I remember when I was young, we did the same, singing in their evenings and partying. And so we need to spend time with young people. And that is costly. It takes time and resources and money to be with young people. There is also the negative aspect, which Celia just mentioned. There are growing levels of anxiety among young people about their future, which is related to environmental degradation and social degradation in some places. And that too needs accompaniment. And I think we as Jesuit or Jesuit institutions, we are called to journey with young people, to invest time with young people and allow structures that would allow and channel their energies towards common good and towards integral ecology. So I really applaud the work of different organizations working with young people. It's a lot of work, it's demanding work. And you too, working with young people, you need to take care of yourselves so that you don't burn out, because you too need support. But young people are our future, and we need to learn from young people and their energy and their insights. However, they are not angels. Maybe they are after they're born for a few seconds, and then it's a lot of work for the parents and others. But they teach us something because I think of the novelty they bring to the world and we have to listen to the spirit in them. I know this was a very generic and general answer, but just to give a bit of a thought. If we don't work with young people, they may get derailed and use their time and resources for things that are not contributive to the common good. The question about cultural change and cultural revolution, I think implicit in the encyclical of Laudato Si and other documents by different popes and commissions is a transition that happens on 3 levels. And I will not be very concrete, but at least to give this framework. One is the personal level. A transition needs to happen, a conversion needs to happen on my own level. I need to be aware and have some capacity of introspection to know what my effect and imprint is on others and on the environment. With that data, to the extent I can have it, I can rethink my behavior and act accordingly. However, ideas are not what defines us. It's not what I think about myself defines me, it is my actions. Celia pointed out virtues. Virtues, in order to be developed, need time of habituation and practice. Virtues practice. Over and over again, I need to habituate my body to eat perhaps less meat or to do a bit more exercise. The same with kindness and other virtues. I have to perform acts of kindness so that we create a culture of kindness and support. It's not just about what I think. Although ideas are important, ideas are not outside of reality. Ideas are part of the reality. Like my head is part of my body. The problem is, of course, sometimes that we in academia or elsewhere, we grow our heads. We have these big heads, and sometimes even argue my idea is more important. But they are important. However, action is what defines us. So the first level is the personal, individual level. The second level is the community level. A transition is happening and needs to happen on a community level. For example, in a local community such as a church, or as a local neighborhood, or as an NGO, it's very important that we continue to associate in associations such as choirs and churches and political parties and so, because those are soft issues of our political regimes, and that will be the third level, which is a systemic level. Change needs to happen on a systemic level. We speak about multilateral bodies and institutions such as COP and United Nations and different bodies, but also our states and our countries. They need to go through a systemic change. Of course, if we reach a transition on a systemic level, the consequences are huge. Imagine just change in policy of a country supported by their implementation, not just words, but implementation. Consequences are tremendous. However, again, we cannot call our state leaders or international organizations or even communities without doing something on ourselves first. Otherwise, we don't walk the talk. And it's very demanding on our heads because it's partly our cognitive dissonance, and it hurts us tremendously. So it's better to start small and do changes in our lives while still supporting the changes on the community and systemic level. That would be my, again, more of a general answer.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Celia.
Muchas gracias, Celia, Peter, por sus expresiones. Yo quisiera comentar un poco una anécdota personal. Yo cuando empecé a estudiar economía y me involucré en la academia, tengo que confesar que me fui haciendo más ateo. Más bien, iba trascendiendo al ateísmo. Pues porque uno, bueno, empieza a cuestionarse como que si existe, no existe, algo más allá, pero justamente como que ahondando más, profundizando más en los temas, en los problemas, como que un retorno justamente a esa necesidad de espiritualidad. Alguna vez escuché a mi papá y a mi hermana platicar sobre lo que necesitaba el mundo y decían, necesitas más espiritualidad. Y en ese momento yo como decía, pues lo que necesitas es más tecnología, más soluciones, ¿no? Pero al pasar de los años me doy cuenta un poco de esa necesidad de vincular todo a lo espiritual. Entonces creo que, bueno, a mí me queda me toca mucho esto que estoy escuchando. Entonces, bueno, muchas gracias.
De nada.
Muchas gracias, José Alberto. Gracias, Peter. Gracias, Celia. Yo creo que este espacio, otra vez, nos invita a lo que ya se mencionó varias veces, a esta revolución cultural radical, y parece que todo tiene que ver con cómo conectamos con nosotros mismos, con nosotras mismas, cómo conectamos con los demás. Y pareciera que esa es la gran revolución a la que estamos llamadas y llamados. Me gustaría, antes de acabar y dar algunas instrucciones para lo que sigue del Foro de Ecología Integral. First of all, thank you very much to the Laudato Si Research Institute and the University of Oxford for making this also possible and for collaborating with us. Thank you very much for, in the other part of the world, being connected to this huge auditorium that is full of young people and students. Gracias también al Seminario TISI, gracias al Departamento de Reflexión Interdisciplinar, a las profesoras y a los profesores, a las estudiantes y estudiantes que estamos aquí escuchando, haciendo esa conexión. Gracias a quienes están participando en el Foro de Ecología Integral, que vienen de diferentes espacios como Tula, de los bosques también de Aguascalientes, de Guatemala, y de muchos otros espacios. Y gracias a los 3 centros de investigación que tenemos en la universidad, al Centrus, al CIES y al SECRIGE, en temas de sustentabilidad, economía social y solidaria, género, y por supuesto que al programa de incidencia, que por cierto no quiero dejar de invitarles, quienes vayan por la explanada, está la Feria de Manos Abiertas y nos acompañan de diferentes partes del país, muchas artesanas, artesanos que han puesto su trabajo y lo materializan en cosas muy bellas que vale la pena ver y que además es una gran oportunidad para comprar como un regalo de Navidad. Así que les invito a que no dejen de ir a la Feria de Manos Abiertas y no nada más comprar, sino hacer una conexión significativa, como es a lo que nos invita justamente esta conferencia. 2 instrucciones breves. Ahora vamos a tener un receso. Y luego nos vamos a ir a 2 diferentes mesas simultáneas en donde revisaremos aquellas aproximaciones conceptuales y debates sobre la ecología integral en América Latina. Voy a empezar con la mesa 2, que nos vamos a quedar aquí en este espacio. La mesa 2 además se va a transmitir a través del Zoom para quienes se registraron en el YouTube, con traducción simultánea al inglés. So if you're listening me and you're connected and you're an English speaker, you'll be able to tend to, by the Zoom link, to the second table, and we're going to hear from Luis Felipe Barbosa Lacerda from the University, Universidad Católica del Pernambuco in Brazil. We're going to hear from Juan Carlos Fonseca Sánchez from la Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. We're going to hear from Iris Stewart and Alan Baez Morales from the University of Santa Clara. And Raúl Díaz from Asdinec in Nicaragua. We're going to hear from Natalia Valdivieso from the University of Manchester, and Marius Vihir, who is an independent climate economist. And with different perspectives in terms of integral ecology, we're going to stay here, both in the Zoom link and aquí en el auditorio. La otra mesa simultánea la vamos a tener en el auditorio Martín Buber. Eso está en el edificio E, en el segundo piso. Ahí vamos a escuchar de Jorge Lagunes Zárate, del Tecnológico Universitario del Valle de Chalco, de Byron Alejandro Gálvez Campos, de la Universidad de Rafael Landívar de Guatemala, y de Alaide Soledad Hernández, de la provincia marista de México. Entonces, son las 2 mesas que tenemos, pueden decidir en cuál quedarse. Las temáticas otra vez tienen que ver con estos diálogos y reflexiones en torno a la ecología integral. Quien no sepa dónde está la Martín Buber, me puede seguir a mí o a José Alberto. Again, thank you very much, muchas gracias. Y después regresamos aquí a este auditorio para las siguientes 2 mesas.